I'm sharing the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response by Pete Walker from the book Complex PTSD. I'm not going into the whole article because it would take too long to go through that today, but I'm going to put the links below, which are going to help you to see how it relates to in your life. So what happens is with the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, it's to do with childhood trauma and complex PTSD and how we respond to events in our lives. So you might find one or two that play out in your life more than others. The fight, flight, freeze, fawn response are normal responses to life itself. Like we're going to fight if somebody's, a dinosaur's running after us, we're going to fight. And flight, and if we see a big spider we might freeze, and then if there's something going on that's scaring us we might fawn, and we all have normal responses. But through childhood trauma, what happens, we can get stuck in one or two reactions to life and to people because we don't feel safe. And what I'm going to do now is go to the next slide. So this is the 4 F's, Pete Walker calls it, complex PTSD from surviving to thriving. So the next one is, okay, he says the fight type and the narcissistic defense. So the trouble is with the word narcissistic, it's got a lot of connotations that there's a lot out there on that, but I just don't think that this is about judgment. This is about looking at ourselves and seeing how we react. So I'm going to read this, and it says, fight flights are unconsciously driven by the belief that power and control can create safety, assuage abandonment, and secure love. Children who are spoiled and given insufficient limits, a uniquely painful type of abandonment, and children who are allowed to imitate the bullying or narcissistic parent may develop a fixated fight response to being triggered. These types learn to respond to their feelings of abandonment with anger and subsequently use contempt, a toxic amalgam of narcissistic rage and disgust, to intimidate and shame others into mirroring them and into acting as extensions of themselves. The entitled fight type commonly uses others as an audience for his incessant monologuing, mogulizing, and may treat a captured freeze or fawn type as a slave or prisoner. In a dominant submission relationship, especially devolved fight types may become sociopathic, ranging along a continuum that stretches between corrupt politician and vicious criminal. Okay, so we have to think carefully when we're reading this because a lot of us can be very sensitive. I remember when I first read this, I thought, oh my God, am I that way? Because we've all got bits in ourselves that, of different bits of our personality in different situations. But through abuse, we can learn stuff that, and ways of relating that's not healthy. And it's not a child's fault, it's just what happens. But the more we understand what's going on, the more we can begin to evolve our behavior that we're not happy with. This is more about us healing. So the next one is the flight type, and the obsessive compulsive defense. So I'm a bit like this. I'm a bit more flight in my reaction to situations. And it says flight types appear as if their starter button is stuck in the on position. They are obsessively and compulsively driven by the unconscious belief that perfection will make them safe and lovable. As children, flight types respond to their family trauma somewhere along a hyperactive continuum that stretches between the extremes of the driven A student and the ADHD dropout running amok. They relentlessly flee the inner pain of their abandonment and lack of attachment with the symbolic flight of constant busyness. When the obsessive compulsive flight type is not doing, she is worrying and planning about doing. Flight types are prone to becoming addicted to their own adrenalization, and many recklessly and regularly pursue risky and dangerous activities to keep their adrenaline high going. These types are also susceptible to stimulating substance addictions as they are to their favorite processed addictions. Workaholism and busyholism and severely traumatized flight types may devolve into severe anxiety and panic disorders. So I went through a stage where I was in fight flight, but I was going through panic, anxiety, and prior to that, I was drinking alcohol, but I stopped drinking alcohol in 2012, which was, as it speaks here, it says about addiction, but addictions can be so many, it can be food, it can be sex, people can be addicted to Facebook, all sorts of different things. So the whole point of understanding these types is to organize our lives so that we're not, in fight or flight or freeze or fawn all the time, that we're being able to live in a more aligned way. Next slide is the freeze type and dissociative defense. And it says many freeze types unconsciously believe that people and danger are synonymous and that safety lies in solitude. Outside of fantasy, many give up entirely on the possibility of love. The freeze response, also known as the camouflage response, often triggers the individual into hiding, isolating, and eschewing human contact as much as possible. This type can be so frozen in the retreat mode that it seems as if their starter button is on the off position. And it is usually the most profoundly abandoned child, the lost child, who is forced to choose and habitate to the freeze response, the most primitive of the 4 Fs. Unable to successfully employ fight, flight, or fawn responses, the freeze type's defense develop around classical disassociation, which allows him to disconnect from experiencing his abandonment and pain and protects him from risky social interactions, any of which might trigger feelings of being re-abandoned. Freeze types often present an ADD. They seek refuge and comfort in prolonged bouts of sleep, daydreaming, wishing, and right brain dominant activities like TV, computer, and video games. They master the art of changing the internal channel whenever inner experiences become uncomfortable. When they are especially traumatized or triggered, they may exhibit a schizoid-like detachment from ordinary reality. So, I don't want anybody out there to take this like literal and start judging themselves. It's just like an overall from the book, and then I'll put the website below with the whole article so that you're able to understand this in deeper detail. And there is a way around these types, and the first thing we've got to do is get rid of the inner critic, which I've spoken about on previous videos the last few days. Next slide. So the fawn type, this one's a bit longer, it says, the fawn type seeks safety by merging with the wishes, needs, and demands of others. They act as if they unconsciously believe that the price of admission to any relationship is the forfeiting of all their needs, rights, preferences, and boundaries. They often begin life like the precocious children described in Alice Miller's The Drama of the Gifted Child, who learn that a modicum of safety and attachment can be gained by becoming the helpful and compliant servant of their parents. Let me see here, make this smaller. There you go. And then it says they are usually the children of at least one narcissistic parent who uses contempt to press them into service, scaring and shaming them out of developing a healthy sense of self, an egoic locus of self-protection, self-care, and self-compassion. This dynamic is explored at length in, he says, my East Bay Therapist article, January-February 2003, Codependency, Trauma, and the Fawn Response. And I say here, and he says, cpwalker.com. And he has got here, which the others have as well, it's like the cure, so to speak, which I'm going to read for the fawn types, but you can do that with the others, but you have to go back to his webpage to see all of this. Fawn types typically respond well to being psychoeducated in this model. This is especially true when the therapist persists in helping them recognize and renounce the repetition compulsion that draws them to narcissistic types who exploit them. Therapy also naturally helps them to shrink their characteristic listening defense as they are guided to widen and deepen their self-expression. I have seen numerous invertebrate codependents finally progress into their assertiveness and boundary-making work when they finally got that even the thought of expressing a preference or need triggers an emotional flashback of such intensity, and they completely disassociate from their knowledge of and the ability to express what they want. Role-playing, assertiveness in session, and attending to the stultifying inner critic processes it triggers helps the codependent build a healthy ego. This is especially true when the therapist interprets witnesses and validates how the individual as a child was forced to put to death so much of her individual self. Grieving these losses further potentiates the developing ego. Okay. Then the last one is the fight fawn that I think there might be a couple of more, but this is another example, the fight fawn. So you can be doing both, like one and added on another one. So fighting and fawning is perhaps the most relational hybrid and most susceptible to love addiction, combines two opposite but magnetically attracting polarities of relational style, narcissism and codependence. This defense is sometimes misdiagnosed as borderline because the individual's flashbacks trigger a panicky sense of abandonment and a desperation for love that causes her to dramatically split back and forth between fighting and clawing for love and cunningly or flatteringly groveling for it. This type is different than the fawn fight in that the narcissistic defense is typically more in ascendancy. The fight fawn hybrid is also distinct from a more common condition where an individual acts like a fight type in one relationship while fawning in another. The archetypal henpecked husband who is a tyrant at work, and from the many nice, mildly codependent people who have critical masses where they will eventually get fed up and blow up about injustice and exploitation. The borderline, like fight fawn type, however, may dramatically facilitate back and forth between these two styles. So we've got to remember these styles of, they've been implanted in us, they've been conditioned. So it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with people, or, I see this play out when in my own life and in other people's lives. We've got healing work to do, and we're going to do it through psychoeducation. And that's why I like sharing this stuff, because I see how vital it is to healing. And he says here about self-assessment, he says, readers may find it informative to self-assess their own hierarchical use of the 4F's responses. They can try to determine their dominant type and hybrid and think about what percentage of their time is spent in each type of the 4F activity. Finally, all 4Fs progressively recover from the multidimensional wounding of complex PTSD as mindfulness of the learned trauma dynamics increases, and as the critic shrinks, as dissociation decreases, as childhood losses are effectively grieved, and as the healthy ego matures into a user-friendly manager of the psyche. As the life narrative becomes more egocytonic and emotional, vulnerability creates authentic experiences of intimacy, and as good enough, safe attachments are attained. Furthermore, it is also important to emphasize that recovery is not an all or none phenomenon, but rather a gradual one marked by decreasing frequency, intensity, and duration of flashbacks. So important. Healing is not all or nothing. It's a process. And the more mindful we get, the more psychoeducation we get, the easier it gets. So I just want to say that we are here to evolve and transcend and to move beyond the dynamics that play out in society and what played out in our childhood, because it's in the past. And we want to step into the future and begin to embrace our new lives. Here's some details on me. You can stop the video. This will also be below the video. This is just me letting you know where this stuff came from. I have a disclaimer here. I am not a medical practitioner, and I don't diagnose or treat medical issues. Content of this video is to help people, because I understand this process very useful, and the book and the knowledge is fantastic.